If you took a single cubic foot of oak, a piece roughly the size of a basketball, dried it out completely, and then submerged it in water for 2 days, that block of wood would absorb enough water to fill roughly 3 to 4 gallons. That is the equivalent of hiding a full watering can inside your raised bed that refills itself every single time it rains. And that is exactly why thousands of gardeners are now burying sticks, branches, and logs in the bottom of their raised beds. But what most of them do not realize is that the water storage is only the beginning of what happens underground. There is a hidden biological process unfolding beneath the surface that actually makes your soil richer, more alive, and more fertile with every passing year. And it costs absolutely nothing. Let me show you exactly how it works. The technique has a name. It is called Hugelkultur, a German word that simply means mound culture. It has been around far longer than you might expect. In 1962, a German gardener named Hermann Andrä published a small booklet about it. He had noticed something fascinating in his grandmother's garden. A pile of old woody debris, branches, and logs left to decompose over time had become the most productive growing spot on the entire property. Plants growing on and around that old wood pile were bigger, healthier, and needed almost no watering compared to the rest of the garden. That observation became the foundation of a technique that would eventually travel across Europe and into North American gardening culture. But the person who really put Hugelkultur on the map was an Austrian mountain farmer named Sepp Holzer. His farm, called the Krameterhof, sits at 1,500 meters elevation in the Austrian Alps. That is nearly 5,000 feet up, with harsh winters and thin mountain soil. Not exactly ideal growing conditions. But Holzer built massive raised mound beds filled with logs and organic material, combined them with terraces and over 70 ponds, and turned 45 hectares of alpine mountainside into one of the most productive permaculture farms in the world. In 1995, professors from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna visited the farm and formally recognized it as an exemplary permaculture system. Now, a 6-foot-tall mound of logs on a mountainside is not practical for a suburban backyard, but the core principle absolutely translates. When you bury wood in the bottom of a raised bed, you are installing the same biological engine that powered Holzer's alpine gardens, just on a smaller, more manageable scale. So let me walk you through what actually happens underground when you bury a branch in moist soil. Because the science here is genuinely fascinating. Wood is not a solid block. If you zoom in on the structure of a tree branch, it is made up of millions of tiny tube-shaped cells. Think of it like a bundle of drinking straws packed tightly together. The walls of those cells are built from cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, and they are naturally water-loving. When those cells are surrounded by moisture, they absorb water into the cell walls first, then fill the hollow centers. A freshly cut piece of pine can hold roughly 250% of its dry weight in water. Birch and beech hold well over 100%. The denser the wood, the more water those cell walls can grip onto. When you bury that wood in your raised bed and it becomes fully saturated, it functions exactly like a sponge sitting in the middle of your soil. During rain or watering, the wood absorbs and stores that moisture. Then, when the surrounding soil starts to dry out because plants are pulling water through their roots, a moisture gradient forms at the surface where wood meets soil. Water naturally moves from the wetter wood into the drier soil through capillary action. The wood does not decide to release water. It happens automatically because of the moisture differential. Every time your soil dries, the wood responds by releasing more moisture. Every time it rains, the wood recharges. But water storage is only the first chapter. The real magic happens when the fungi arrive. Within the first few weeks of burial, soil bacteria begin colonizing the surface of the wood, starting to break down the simplest compounds. Then, over the first 3 to 6 months, saprophytic fungi move in. These are the wood-eating specialists. Genera like Trichoderma, phenerochaete and tremites produce specialized enzymes that can break apart cellulose and even lignin, the tough structural compound that makes wood rigid. As they digest the wood, they create millions of tiny new pores in its structure, making it even more absorbent over time. This is why a 2-year-old piece of buried wood holds dramatically more water than a freshly buried one. The fungi have literally remodeled its internal architecture. And then, something remarkable happens in the later stages of decomposition. Mycorrhizal fungi, the species that form symbiotic partnerships with living plant roots, begin colonizing the same decomposing wood. Research published in the ISME journal found that species like Piloderma and Tylospora become highly abundant in well-decayed wood. And here is what makes this incredible. Using stable isotope analysis, researchers confirmed that these fungi actively transfer both nitrogen and carbon from the decomposing wood directly to the roots of living plants. They are building physical pipelines, fungal threads called hyphae, that connect your buried wood to your tomato roots, your pepper roots, and your squash roots. Your plants are literally feeding on the wood through a fungal network that grows more connected and more efficient with every passing season. If you are learning something new from this, subscribing helps me keep making these deep dive gardening science videos every week. It really does make a difference. Now, there is one piece of this puzzle that trips up more gardeners than anything else, and it happens in year 1. Fresh hardwood has a carbon to nitrogen ratio somewhere between 400 and 800 to 1. That is wildly out of balance. Soil microbes need a ratio closer to 25 or 30 to 1 to do their work efficiently. So when they start decomposing all that carbon-rich wood, they pull nitrogen from the surrounding soil to compensate. This is called nitrogen immobilization, and it is the reason some gardeners have a terrible first year with buried wood and declare the whole technique a failure. The fix is simple, and it is absolutely essential. When you build your bed, you need to include a nitrogen-rich layer between the wood and your planting soil. 2 to 4 inches of fresh grass clippings, composted manure, or green plant waste placed directly on top of the wood feeds those microbes the nitrogen they need without stealing it from your crops. Skip this layer, and your tomatoes will yellow and sulk. Include it, and year 1 works just fine. By year 2 to 3, the dynamic completely reverses. As microbial populations cycle and die, they release their stored nitrogen back into the soil. The effective carbon to nitrogen ratio of the decomposing wood drops steadily. The system shifts from a net nitrogen consumer to a net nitrogen contributor. Your soil does not just maintain its fertility, it actively improves year after year without you adding much of anything. Let me talk about which wood to actually use, because species selection matters more than most guides will tell you. Your best options for buried wood are hardwoods like oak, maple, birch, apple, and cherry. Oak is the long-term champion. It is dense, holds enormous amounts of water, and decomposes slowly over 3 to 7 years, giving you a sustained reservoir. Maple and birch decompose faster, providing quicker nutrient release. Fruit wood from pruning apple or cherry trees is excellent and often available for free. Softwoods like pine, spruce, and fir work perfectly well, despite what you may have read online. The resin in pine does slow initial fungal colonization slightly, but it breaks down and causes no harm to plants. Pine is absolutely fine to bury. However, there are 3 categories you need to avoid completely. First, cedar, redwood, and black locust. These species are prized for building raised bed frames specifically because they resist rot. But that same rot resistance means they will sit in your bed for a decade without decomposing, without holding meaningful moisture, and without feeding your soil biology. Use cedar for the frame. Never bury it inside. Second, black walnut. This tree produces a compound called juglone that inhibits the growth of many garden plants, including tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes. Juglone persists in dead walnut wood for years as it decomposes. The Morton Arboretum and Penn State Extension both confirm that toxicity from decaying walnut roots can last 5 or more years. Keep every part of black walnut out of your raised beds. And third, never use pressure-treated lumber, painted wood, or plywood. Pressure-treated wood contains copper, chromium, or arsenic compounds that leach heavy metals into your soil. Plywood glues release formaldehyde. These materials are toxic to soil biology and to you. Now let me give you the actual build sequence. Start with your largest logs and thick branches laid directly on the bottom of the bed. These are your moisture reservoir. Layer medium branches on top of and around the logs, stacking them crosswise for better interlocking. Fill remaining gaps with smaller twigs and sticks. Then add your nitrogen-rich layer, 2 to 4 inches of grass clippings or composted manure. Follow that with 2 to 4 inches of finished compost as a biological buffer zone. Finally, fill the top 8 to 12 inches with quality raised bed soil mix. For a 24-inch deep bed, the wood can fill the bottom 8 to 12 inches, roughly 40 to 50% of the total volume. For an 18-inch bed, 6 to 8 inches of wood works well. Here is the critical step that almost everyone forgets. Soak the wood thoroughly before burial, or water the completed bed deeply and repeatedly before planting. Dry wood buried in soil initially pulls moisture away from plant roots rather than providing it. Pre-soaking for 24 to 48 hours solves this completely. Expect the bed to settle about 10 to 20% in height during the first year as the wood compresses and decomposes. Top dress with compost annually to compensate. Do not dig into or relayer the bed, because doing so would destroy the fungal networks that are building underground. Here is the part that makes the financial case impossible to ignore. A standard 4-foot by 8-foot raised bed that is 24 inches deep requires roughly 2.5 cubic yards of fill material. If you buy all of that as bagged raised bed mix from a garden center, you are looking at $150 to $300 for a single bed. Fill the bottom half with free branches and logs from your yard, your neighbor's tree trimming, or a local arborist, and you cut that cost by 40 to 60%. That is potentially $100 or more saved per bed. And the soil you end up with after 3 years will be dramatically better than anything you could have bought. Now, I want to be honest about the limitations, because this technique is not perfect for every situation. If your garden sits in a low-lying area with poor drainage and waterlogged soil, buried wood will make the problem worse by staying too wet and turning anaerobic. If your beds are only 12 inches deep, the benefits are marginal, and you are better off just adding compost. If you live in the southern United States where termites are common, keep Hugelkultur beds at least 30 feet from your house foundation. A professional termite inspector noted that buried wood beds do increase termite attraction. Many gardeners in termite-prone areas report no problems, but the risk is real and location-dependent, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. And the most important expectation to set correctly: buried wood does not eliminate watering. In a traditional 6-foot-tall Hugelkultur mound, the massive wood core can sustain plants through summer drought without irrigation. In a raised bed adaptation with 12 to 24 inches of depth, the wood helps significantly, and experienced gardeners consistently report needing 30 to 50% less watering by the second or third year. That is a genuine and meaningful reduction, but it is not zero. What buried wood does give you is something no bag of soil mix ever will: a living underground system that builds itself, that gets better with time, that turns free yard waste into a self-watering, self-fertilizing engine your plants can tap into for years. 3 years from now, when you pull up a handful of soil from a wood-layered bed and see that dark, crumbly, earthworm-rich material that smells like a forest floor after rain, you will understand exactly why smart gardeners are putting sticks in their raised beds. If this video helped you understand the science behind this technique, check out my video on the best soil mix for raised beds. I go deep on exactly what to put in that top planting layer to get your beds producing from day one.